Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the second season of Lifetime Value. I'm your host, Ritik. Today, I'm extremely excited to have a good friend of mine, Carla, who is a product designer at Konfio. And design for somebody like me has always been such a big question mark because I've always been in that sort of black and white, financy part of every startup I've been involved in. So today, Carla is here to talk to us about what she feels is the value add of a good designer in a startup, how to make decisions when you have something so subjective around design, basics of design thinking and a creative process, and also share some advice for young entrepreneurs or young designers who are planning to break into the startup world. And a side note, Carla was also the one who designed the logo for the podcast, which I'm a big fan of. So without further ado, please help me welcome Carla.
Hi.
Hey,
How are
Carla.
you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for that intro.
Well, it's very well deserved, and I'm a big fan of how you do things. And when we worked together back at Confio, I remember I would just have like random things in my mind, and I'll just say it, and somehow you would manage to make it appear out of thin air and through amazing design and graphics. So I would love to know about that, but why don't you start us off with an introduction of yourself and how you got to where you are right now?
I'm right now a product designer, but my background is completely graphic design. I
Okay.
studied graphic design at college,
Mm-hmm.
but my very first tasks at school were already with digital design.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably why I always went more for digital projects.
Mm-hmm.
Actually my first work was at a startup where I
Mm-hmm.
didn't knew what startups were. I work at Kitchen. Kitchen was like the very first Mexican platform for e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
You could make your own store and they will manage all the shipping and everything else after you made the sale. So I started in this startup environment without knowing what a startup was. And
Mm-hmm.
when I saw there how they work and how it was like a tech company but without being too corporate, it was really interesting to me, so that I started to leaning my career path that way.
Mm-hmm. So you've been at Confio for a while now. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
can tell us how your journey through Confio has been, because I realize you've had several different positions. And also one thing that you mentioned initially was that studied graphic design, but then you started working on digital design. What is the difference between these two?
Yeah, first I will start with the graphic, like versus digital design. Graphic design could be like more traditional media, like probably an illustration, like
Mm-hmm.
handmade, things that is like material that you can touch, that you can feel. At school, we had like these classes that were like more art, like
Mm-hmm.
painting, and that's what I meant with graphic design.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course, graphic design has editorial design that it's creating like this design for magazines, for books,
Mm-hmm.
and now digital design is what, for example, we see like every day, in our phones, in our laptops, in our screens. That's more like digital products that, like, probably like further we will talk about it more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, digital design is like the user interface, a video, even like the ads from Facebook. Do you know like this social media
Yeah.
called Twitch?
Yes.
That can, like, they make these scenarios for like Travis Scott, J Balvin inside the
Mm-hmm.
game. That's
Mm-hmm.
also digital design. It's like
Got it.
something completely, I would say, intangible, that like you can
Mm-hmm.
see it and you can listen, but you don't feel it. You can touch it.
Got it. Got it.
Yep.
That was a great explanation. And what about your journey within Confio?
Yeah, my journey in Confio has been really cool. I think that I have learned a lot. I I don't want to sound like a cheesy person, but I really feel that I am a different person, like from
Uh-huh.
what I was 2 years ago. I mean, of course, in a professional way, no?
Yeah.
before working in Konfio, I used to work at a digital agency as
Mm-hmm.
a designer, well, digital designer.
Mm-hmm.
And what you learn there is to really be really fast in terms of doing concepts and like doing proposals for clients.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool. You do like some digital campaigns, and you actually have fun doing this, but you never know if what you designed was okay. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because our campaign, people will buy a product, or oh, okay, our sales went 50% up. We didn't know that. We were only designing because we had fun, and that was
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
And when I started at Confio,
Mm-hmm.
I started as digital designer for marketing for growth.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to learn a lot about ads and the
Mm-hmm.
performance of these ads. And if I made a design, how many people clicked on that design. And we were doing like this, okay, purple ad versus a white ad.
Mm-hmm.
And like to start, I started to understand how people react to
Yeah.
these ads. So
Yeah.
that's how I started into this kind of like understanding of design and
Mm-hmm.
how they impact on people. It wasn't just about having fun and thinking about crazy ideas
Yeah.
and crazy campaigns. It was about making things work, for
Mm-hmm.
example, in this case, Confio.
Great.
So that's how kind of how I started this introduction to product design, because of course in the marketing team I started to understand about loans and to start to
Mm-hmm.
understand about customer success. I
Mm-hmm.
started to learn about even copywriting when I was only a designer.
Wow.
Um, I also started to talk about clients and how they felt with Confio, and that's when I really started to see that everything we made had some impact.
So, Carla, moving on to the next question, why don't you explain to us what a product designer does using the amazing logo that you designed for the podcast itself as an example?
That's a really cool example, because sometimes our job it's more about co-creation. It's about finding the right solution for from the problem. In this case, you had this podcast, but it
Mm-hmm.
needed some identity, right? So first, we need to have context of
Mm-hmm.
the problem and to understand it. So in this case, you explained to me
Mm-hmm.
about this lifetime value chart and
Mm-hmm.
what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
And I also looked for it on Google and like kind of like read about it. So I know what I was going to design. So
Mm-hmm.
I will say like the first step is to understand the problem we want to solve.
Mm-hmm.
The cool thing about also this task was that you also had a really idea of what you wanted. Like I remember you told me like I really something like really minimal, like I want like probably a black background,
Mm-hmm.
like I like this font. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really cool for us because we are not like magicians that
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, like oh sure, let me get this logo out of my pocket. Like no, we really need to understand what the final client or user wants,
Mm-hmm.
and then we start working. Like first we need all the context, some references, some podcast. I even remember you told me about some other podcast, and I also
Mm-hmm.
like kind of like search. Yeah, like sometimes we are not like creating something like oh out of the blue.
And I guess this is the difference between a good and a great product designer is, you were able to visualize and put to tangible design what I was just thinking in my mind. The first logo that we had does not even closely resemble the final logo ended up being. So maybe you can also take us through the role of communication we had and how you managed to discern what I was just, spitballing and just saying words into something that was tangible in terms of the final image.
Like first I made like some few sketches, and with all this information that I already had, I started like doing some proposals.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I really wanted to show you, I wanted to show them to you
Mm-hmm.
in a really early stage, so it could be easier for us to like make some changes, like tweak this, change that. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important to have feedback really, really early.
Mm-hmm.
And then with this early feedback, you again start to work. And for example, I remember like the first proposals were kind of like more only typography, and also I made some lettering, and I attacked the problem in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end, you knew what you wanted, so it was really easy for me to
Mm-hmm.
then solve this visually.
Yeah.
And I remember you sent me like this sketch of the chart,
Yeah.
and it was really cool. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. So then I started working on that sketch.
Yeah. Got it.
That's what I was talking about co-creation, because sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
not that we as designers we are designing something like new, and oh, like this is going to break some minds. No, it's probably just about you knew what you wanted, so you had like this financial context, and
Mm-hmm.
you knew this chart. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really about co-creation. Like I don't know, like someone that it's really far from design gives feedback, and it will be a different way of thinking.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And maybe you can give example of a project that didn't go so well. Like, what are some of the red flags that you see when you know that, oh man, this is not going to turn out well?
Okay. Well, right now I can't recall like a really specific project, but
Sure.
I really like with my experience, I I already know when something is not going on the right way.
Uh-huh.
First of all, client doesn't know what they want.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really big problem,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes they are waiting for you to guess what they want, and that's not how it works. Like first of all, we need to have a really specific problem to solve,
Mm-hmm.
and from this we can start like this design process. So
Mm-hmm.
if you don't know what you want, I won't know either. like
Yeah.
like I told, we are not magicians. It should be a really specific problem, and
Mm-hmm.
then like start working. Like other kind of like red flags are
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes it's the other way, and they really want a really big thing, and they are
Mm-hmm.
really ambitious about this, and
Mm-hmm.
they are not realistic. Like sometimes they are like, yeah, I want this really big app, and I want it for tomorrow, or I want it like in a week. Like no, 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 wait, let's see how. Like
Yeah.
we have to cut this pie, and okay,
Yeah.
like what are the key points, what are we are solving in this
Mm-hmm.
problem. Like
Mm-hmm.
do we need all these features, or we can like go just for one.
Yeah. Great point. And it's so interesting because a lot of my job is, and I have nothing to do with design, still involves a very similar process, good communication, managing expectations, going back and forth, researching, thought process, and sort of analytical skills required. We're much closer than I previously thought, for sure.
That's a really cool conclusion, because I
Mhm.
also, the more I learn about design and about startups, the more
Mhm.
I feel like design is not subjective. It's
Mhm.
really analytical. We need to be really objective about what we are doing,
Mhm.
because like I told, we are not doing art. This
Mhm.
is, if I do a logo, it's not for me. Like it's for
Yeah,
you and for people to understand what it's about, your podcast about.
absolutely.
So like more people should think about like you.
I would love to hear your thoughts, like, especially when you're working with a non-design person. Is that important, or how does that tie in to what makes the difference between a great and an average product designer?
A good product designer will think about everything before going to visual
Mm,
design.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because there's a really long path before you start designing like wireframing and doing this final UI. Like in
Mm-hmm.
some cases, there's no even UI needed. There's no visual
Sure.
design needed. Sometimes they're more about how to improve some process, how to improve some copies, how to, I don't know, like improve a service that already exists, a product that already exists. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I would say is that they don't go right away to visual design.
Okay.
The second I would say it's they question a lot. They always
Mm-hmm.
making questions
Mm-hmm.
to the different stakeholders. We as product designers we really need to be sensitive and to understand the real problem that we need to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have to be like really down to earth
Yeah.
with our solutions. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's our those are the two key points of a good product designer.
One last question before we move on to the next section. What is the career path of a product designer? Is it important that you start at a design focused company like Apple or something? Does that matter in the career path?
Well, yeah, actually, that's a really good question because I really don't know. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like product design is a really kind of like new discipline as we know
Mm-hmm.
right now. Like even
Mm-hmm.
UX, UI, they're really new.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, for me, it has a little bit challenging
Mm-hmm.
because, well, I was like more digital and visual designer. So my instinct as a visual designer was to think first about visuals
Mm-hmm.
when it's actually backwards. I think the career paths are really, really different depending on your discipline. For me, it started as a graphic and digital designer, and then I started like digging in this discipline and I liked it. Like working in places like Apple and really like big design firms, for sure it should have its perks of learning from top creatives around the world and top designers. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that probably like, and I would say Konfio, for example, that's a place that it was really new and it was starting. It gives
Mm-hmm.
you a lot of feel to experiment. I think would say that career path is really subjective.
That's great. I mean, and that's so refreshing to hear because in a lot of the other fields and even in the startup world, which is meant to be experimental, you always have like a fixed career path. You are on track to becoming a VP of blah, blah. And then after that, in a few years, maybe you might be C-level or there might be some other task, but you'll always stay within that one defined lane. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, the way you're expressing it, it sounds so refreshing to hear that, hey, you know what, there could be something completely different you're doing. Now, moving on to our next section, payback period, the guest asks the host a question. So, Carla, what question do you have for me today?
Oof. Well, let's talk about design.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I really want to ask you like something about like if you were a designer,
Mhm.
you have to design a new app. What would you
Wow.
design?
Wow. That is such a
Boom.
great question. Yeah. That is so interesting. Personally, the passion that I have for is a very easy to use app that can allow, I would say, Mexicans to save money. That's something that I've been really thinking about the last few months or so, because I've seen like a lot of other countries, like in Singapore, we have this app called Stashaway where you just send money and then with a very easy design and very straightforward, transparent way, you can know what is happening to your money. Normally when we store our money in the banks, you can see the balance, but that's about it. But a lot of people are very hesitant or like nervous about giving their money to somebody and there's just like a black hole that they don't know what's happening with the money. And then, but as long as it's going up, they're like, yeah, that's fine. But the day it goes down, there's so many questions because they don't know what's happening with the money. And I feel like this is something that I want to try and design where it's so intuitive, where you know exactly where your money is going, and you're given the right education within the app itself so that you become the master of your money, not the other way around. I kind of feel like in Latino countries, especially, the culture of saving is not very good. You know, people don't like to save money. People are always spending and with like meses sin intereses, you know, monthly
Oh, I
installment
know.
plans. It's so dangerous because you're constantly in debt because you want to spend money, you know. So I kind of feel like reversing that mindset is very important, and the only way you can do it is if you can save money from like even 1 peso onwards, you know, 100 pesos onwards or whatever, and be able to transparently see and track where it's going. And back to your point, you know, I feel that design is going to be so important in this particular app because, see, at the end of the day, I'm just taking money and putting it somewhere else, which is not very difficult to do. But to be
Yeah.
able to get the trust of the people would only be done through a good UX. Like, oh, what happened to my money this month? Okay, it was invested in this 5 things, and then I lost money in 2 things, but I gained money in 3 things. That's fine. And then this is my overall return since the day I deposited money, etc., etc. Without a good design, it'll just sends the user even backwards, 2 steps back, because they would have lesser trust, believe that, you know, you can't save money, you have to put it under your bed or something, is a smarter option because the design of the app made them more scared, you know. So yeah, it's a very, very good question.
Nice, nice answer. Mic drop.
Thank you.
I'm a terrible product designer.
No,
Nice.
no,
No, and that's
no.
really cool, and that's really true. I think that's the cool thing about being a product designer, to identify these
Mhm.
needs, just as you say it, like, okay, like Mexicans don't save money. Like I
Mhm.
would say I started like a few months back, I started
Mhm.
saving money. Like I didn't have this mindset of
Mhm.
saving money. So
Mhm.
I think it's a really cool idea.
Well, thank you. Well, I mean, I hope I can count on you to create something
Of
that
course.
everybody would like.
Of course, you can count me.
Thank you. Well, before we wrap up, Carla, do you want to give any parting thoughts or some advice for young designers looking to break into the startup world or become future product designers?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would like to recommend Dieter Rams, an industrial designer from like the 60s.
Hmm.
Do you know this brand Braun, the electrodomestics?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, he
Brown, yeah.
was a designer for
Wow.
the of these products,
Uh-huh.
and he's a really great designer. He has this film called Rams. You should
Okay.
watch it. It's really cool. And
Okay.
he had this quote that says, "Good design is as little as possible."
Yep.
And I think it should be like a mantra for designers and
Hmm.
for young designers, like to be really design. It's transparent, like it should feel natural, like you said, like
Hmm.
there it should be like a design that feels safe, that it doesn't make me scared about what I'm
Hmm.
doing with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
The other would be like to stay curious. I
Yep.
think curiosity, it's great for solving problems because you
Hmm.
get out of the box.
Great, great advice, Carla. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Would you like to share your contact information for our listeners if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm Carla Vivani, and
Okay.
right now I'm working on portfolio, so wait for it soon.
Great. Thank you so much again, Carla,
Thank
for
you.
taking time out. And I hope to be speaking to you again when you have your portfolio out and you've gone on to do way better things as well.
Thank you. No, thank you. I had a really great time.